It's the last day of the Lunar New Year and I'm a little bit behind on my schedule. I'm at my usual West Coast market haunt, and the Lunar New Year God of Fortune is still here and I'm going to sketch it. I wanted to produce one video a week, but clearly I'm behind, so let's get this done. I'm going to do as much sketching as I can in February, opening a new sketchbook. I'm going to try to fill it with February sketches, and I hope that you follow my adventure along. I'm hoping to produce as many sketches and as many videos as I can with this sketchbook. This video is part of a series called Sketching Loosely. This will be tip number 5. I want to talk about the concept of macro right and micro wrong. But first, let me illustrate what I mean by that. Okay, the concept is very simple. Macro right. What is macro? The idea of macro is big picture. So if you can get the outline of this car correct, then the macro is correct. What is macro? It's usually size, proportion, the shape has got a feel of the intent. The intent here is to draw the car, so you can see that or the truck. So you must get this right. The macro is correct. What you put inside then is less important. In other words, the small little detail is less important. So in order to sketch more loosely, what you need to do is focus on the outline, the big picture, the macro perspective. And it should take as much of the sketchbook as possible. One of the things I try to do is when I look at an object to sketch is try to size the whole thing as compared to the size of my sketchbook. Usually I would try to use my palm to give a gauge of how big the sketch will be, and I will try to put together the sketch in such a way that it's macro correct, as in I ensure that the size and proportion at the macro level is correct, and that takes a lot of my effort and my consideration when I'm sketching. Of course, it doesn't give you super accuracy. I mean, accuracy is by training and discipline and practice, and of course if you take photograph and you trace it, you get super accuracy. But in this case, it really is just a bit of a feel, a bit of an experience, and but if you focus on the big picture, your chances of getting it accurate is much higher. It takes a bit of practice, but not too bad. Just to give you a glimpse of my back of the studio sort of shot, this is the setup, my camera, and my sketching gear. It's very simple, very small setup that I have, but that's enough to give you this video. So once your macro is done, and you're going in to fill in the blank, so to speak, the micro parts, the beard, the mouth, the eyes, and so on and so forth. The way I think about it is that the macro, I try to get 100% or 90% or as accurate as I can in terms of size, proportion, placements of angles of the lines, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the micro part, I let it a little bit more loose, as in I'm going for 70 or 60% accuracy. And even if I miss the placement or I miss the shape or size, it has less bearings on the outcome of the sketch itself, because if you look at it at a macro level, it is already giving you the accuracy that you need. So that's what I mean by macro right and micro wrong. I guess I'm not exactly saying it is micro completely wrong, but I guess it's more about accuracy. Your macro should be as accurate as possible, and at the micro level it can be a little bit less accurate, and yet the sketch will look okay. This goes for architectural element as well. The overall size of the building and windows can be the macro. Sorry, the windows will be the micro. The doors, a little bell, or all the bells and whistles that goes with the architectural element can be a little bit off. But as long as you get the macro view or outline correct, you are probably going to look okay with your sketch. I've been using this concept for a long time, and it allows me to go fast without being bogged down by the tiny detail with all the accuracy of the small elements. Okay, now that I've finished the sketch, let me just put in the date. I use a diluted fountain pen so that it doesn't look so ghastly. The ink isn't very black, it looks a bit more like pencil line with a diluted ink. It's the 5th of February 2023. So that's my finished sketch, outline and the detail, macro and micro both. Well, I think this statue will be here for another few weeks, couple weeks maybe, and it'll be gone. Well, as per my favorite technique, I put in the background first with darks. In this case, I'm going in with bunch of purples. I'm just gonna throw in whatever's my palette. That's French ultramarine. There's a little bit of permanent alizarin crimson. There's also Cabozel violet. All these are Daniel Smith color, by the way, and a little bit of neutral tint as well thrown in. As you can see, I use very wet on dry. In fact, I let all the colors that I thrown in melt as much as possible. It's very watery, it's full of water, it flows, so I'm usually very careful watching out for the moisture not to get splash all over the place. So at this point I thought maybe I'll put in a bit of texture. I'm using a empty fountain pen. I have a couple of these, empty, in other words, not loaded with any ink. I use it to kind of just draw edges, lines on the edges to give you a bit of texturing. Brush doesn't give you very thin line, but using a empty fountain pen, if you like, can gives you very fine line that you can kind of play with. I enjoy this. Well, it's kind of like waiting for the watercolor to dry, right? I mean, you need to be patient and you need to learn how to let it, and not mess around with it. But I'm a little bit hyper, so what I do is I use that time while I watch people go around and maybe do a bit of catching up on my Twitter feed and stuff like that. But you can also use the time to use this little texturing technique to wait for the moisture to dry. And while it's still a little bit wet, I decided to give it a bit more texture on the color side. I drop in a bit of cadmium yellow and cadmium orange. This technique of dropping opaques on transparent gives it a very interesting texturing, which I really like. I discovered it somewhat by accident, and of course you don't overdo it. It's opaques are like diamonds. You don't want ghastly big size diamond screaming away your wealth, so to speak. But in this case, it is just tiny dots on that, and it's really bright on dark, if you like, and it's lovely just to see it sparkle. I love this. Try it as well. This is really a fun technique as well on color. And then what I do is I use a dry tissue and I mop up some of the really wet spot, if you like. Well, if I have time, I wouldn't bother with this. I'll just leave it to dry. But since I'm outside and I'm kind of, not so much in a hurry, but I didn't want to waste too much time waiting for the moisture to dry. It's a really wet day, by the way. So if you're out and about with a wet day, your sketch is gonna take longer to dry. So I decided just to dab a little bit with a dry tissue to just take a little bit of the excess moisture away. But I don't really want to touch too much because it is quite nice to see the natural drying process. Any meddling with water and moisture will kind of mess up the sketch. Okay, and at this point I decided to clean the palette. Use a tissue just to wipe it out. This is a good practice. You always want clean color as much as you can and not contaminate your colors when you mix them, and so clean your palette off. Okay, so now I'm going in to put in the bright yellow, and I'm going to try to simulate light and maybe leaf white, so paper white for some parts. I'm not too being careful about it. Again, this is a very loose sketch, and it's not a fine art with lots of care to get the details right. Right? It's a sketch, remember? So what you're gonna do is kind of just have your brush dance around. Dance as in like, don't make too big, boring geometrical shape, but have it dab here and there. And I'm using two colors here, lemon yellow and new gamboge. New gamboge is a little bit more warm. It's a warmer yellow, and lemon yellow is kind of like a cooler yellow, if you like. And between the two, I get a bit more of a contrast and so on, makes the shape of the yellow more interesting. Yellow itself is not very varied. In other words, there's not many variety of yellow that you can have. You can have a bit of dirty yellow, which makes brown. You can have a cooler side like lemon yellow. You can have a bit of warmer side like new gamboge. But by and large, that's about all you can do with yellow, right? So and you try to vary it as much as you can, but that's about it. So at this point, I decided to use more of my fountain pen drawing tool. It's an empty fountain pen that I've demonstrated earlier. I'm going to load it with cadmium scarlet, and I'm going to use it to draw the red lines that are very thin. And when you contrast thin lines with big blobs of colors, the sketch somewhat has a nice contrast in terms of shape and size. And this is a very nice thing to do while you're waiting for your bigger wash to dry. In other words, I'm waiting for my yellow to dry. I'm just gonna go in on dry, sort of wet on dry, but I'm using a fountain pen tool to give that sort of playfulness of the line, somewhat like drawing, or even using a thin tool, but it gives you lots of options. You can use it to draw little things, some of the notes, zodiac information that is underneath the statue. Okay, now I'm going for the darks. I'm going with Cabozel Violet with a dash of neutral tint. I'm going in, as you can see, the mustache, the beard, the belt, and so on and so forth. Basically, now I am again macro right and micro wrong. I'm not going for precision, I'm just going for the broad shape. As far as I'm concerned, if I can capture the broad shape, I am pretty much in the ballpark, and I'm done. And even the color, I'm not really going for exact color. It's really a purple yellow sketch. From a color scheme perspective, that's always a good contrast, direct opposite on the color wheel, and that gives you sort of the pop, if you like. Yeah, I think that's about it for this one. Let me speed up the next part. I'm just going in again with my empty fountain pen. I'm going in to draw. Oh, by the way, I kind of missed out some of the little bits and pieces here and there, so make up for some errors, but now you're just going in and observe and just filling in the little, filling the gap, if you like. Your outline's done, your big picture's done. Now you're just going to little doodles here and there. The hand, the gold nuggets that he's holding on his left hand, and also just belt info and more red embellishment and so on and so forth. The idea is it's all play. Once your macro is right, you can afford to just play with your sketch. You can have fun, you can be a bit more loose, you don't have to go for accuracy. You're just going for rough semblance of what you're drawing and sketching. And as you can see in my sketch here, there's lots of mistakes in the micro view of it. Lots of errors, if you like. Proportion, placement of the shape, and so on. But when you look at the whole sketch, it will still work, simply because the macro is in the ballpark. The micro is probably not so much in the ballpark, but it looks loose just by the way I approached it, right? So I think I'm done. I'm just gonna put in my name, and then I'm gonna wait for it to dry and then do a bit of evaluation to see whether there's anything else I need to do with a sketch. And evaluation and edit is very important at the end, so make sure you always do a review and take a look at what else you can do. Well, sometimes you do mess up the sketch, but edit and evaluation is still important. So I'm done on site. That's the sketch that I did while sitting in front of the statue, and let's go home and see. So when I got home, I decided to do a bit of touch-up, put in a bit of shadow, and to sort of, well, of course I reference from the photograph at this point. I'm looking at sculpting three-dimensional shape out of two-dimensional flat sketch. How do you do it? Well, you used the concept of shadow, the concept of sculpting, depth. You do separation of shape as well. In other words, you separate the front from the back, maybe a bit darker, and so on. Here I use the color Moon Glow from Daniel Smith to give me that the shadow on the yellow shapes that I have here. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Remember, get the macro right. You can go easy on the micro. In other words, you can be a bit more loose. I hope this tip helps in some ways in your sketch, and enjoy that you enjoy this video. Let me know how my videos are helping you. Do drop me a note at the bottom. I really appreciate that you stay with me through this video to the end, and I hope you learned something from this today. Alright, stay safe wherever you are. This is Whee Teck out.